You must understand, the empath does not break like the others. They do not scream, they do not fight. They do not declare war in loud proclamations. No, when the empath reaches the threshold, they vanish. And that, my friends, is where the narcissist's nightmare begins. This phenomenon, the quiet departure of the soul who once mirrored the narcissist's every wound, is not merely a psychological event. It is archetypal, it is alchemical. It is what I have long referred to as a psychic transformation, an eruption of the self from the prison of the persona. And when this happens, when the empath snaps, it is not rage that overtakes them, it is realization, a sacred, often painful recognition that they have been participating in a drama, not of their making, a theater of shadows. You see, the empath was not born merely to absorb. They were born to see, to feel, yes, but also to see into the soul of another. That gift, though divine in its origin, becomes a curse when placed in the hands of one who does not wish to be seen. The narcissist, that fragile god of mirrors, is terrified of being known. Their entire reality hinges on illusion. They survive on projection, on control, on distortion. They do not love. They possess. They do not connect. They conquer. And so when the empath, who has been slowly drowning in the narcissist's sea of falsehood, finally opens their eyes, something ancient awakens in them. I have seen this pattern countless times, in dreams, in case studies, in myths. The empath, often unaware of their own light, becomes entangled with the archetype of the wounded tyrant, the narcissist. This is no mere romance. This is an unconscious contract, a dance of opposites. The empath, the healer, believes they can soothe the inner chaos of the narcissist. They mistake sensitivity for medicine. They try to become the savior of someone who does not want to be saved, only obeyed. But here is where it becomes dangerous. The empath begins to abandon themselves in the name of compassion. They confuse boundaries with selfishness. They excuse manipulation as trauma. They justify cruelty as pain in disguise. And slowly, they forget. They forget who they are. They forget what they need. They forget the very essence of the self, the core from which all healing emerges. This forgetting is not benign. It is a kind of psychic death, a slow erosion of the spirit, and it manifests not only in psychological symptoms, depression, anxiety, exhaustion, but also in the body, in the dream life, in the quality of one's perception. The empath begins to feel like a ghost in their own life. They walk through rooms and no longer recognize their reflection. The mask of the persona becomes heavier by the day, but the soul has a limit. And when that moment comes, when the soul can no longer carry the weight of suppression, it does not ask permission to awaken. It simply rises, often through dreams, often through illness, often through a sudden, inexplicable surge of energy that says, no more, this is the snap, but it is not an explosion, it is an implosion. The empath does not lash out. They return inward. They reclaim their projection. They begin the descent into their own shadow. to retrieve the parts they gave away. The narcissist, of course, never sees it coming, because they never truly saw the empath to begin with. They saw a mirror, a tool, a source of validation. They believed the empath existed for them. They were drunk on their own illusion. So when the empath finally disappears, energetically, emotionally, spiritually, it is as if a portal closes and suddenly the narcissist is left alone with what they most fear themselves. There is a reason the narcissist seeks the empath. It is not love. It is not connection. It is reflection. The narcissist sees in the empath what they buried long ago, the capacity to feel, to grieve, to suffer, to heal. The empath becomes a sacred wound they have long denied, but rather than face it, they exploit it. They bind the empath to their unhealed inner child and call it love, and the empath, conditioned by centuries of spiritual rhetoric that equates love with sacrifice, accepts this bondage as destiny. They endure, they forgive, they pray, and in doing so, they reinforce the narcissist's illusion that they are the center of the world, that their suffering is more important, that their wounds must be worshipped. But again, I tell you, the soul has a limit. The empath snaps not in hatred, but in awakening. It is the same movement I have described in the individuation process, a rupture in the psyche where the false self dissolves and the true self begins to emerge. It is not clean. It is not poetic. It is messy, terrifying, and sacred. The empath begins to see that their compassion was not always compassion, it was fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being unworthy unless they were useful. And so the journey begins, a spiral descent into the unconscious. The empath begins to retrieve the shadow they denied, the rage, the grief, the need for sovereignty. They stop rescuing, they start remembering. They reclaim the voice that once whispered no, but was always silenced by the need to be nice. It is here that a great reversal occurs. The empath, once dependent on the narcissist's approval, becomes immune to it. They see the pattern, they name the dynamic, they break the spell, and in that moment, the narcissist panics, not because they miss the empath, but because the supply is gone. The mirror has cracked. The illusion is dying. This moment is not just psychological, it is mythic. It is the Persephone who escapes the underworld. It is the goddess who remembers her power. It is the sacred return of the self from exile. And it is often accompanied by dreams of fire, of floods, of rebirth. The soul is cleansing itself of the false stories it was forced to live. And so I tell you, when the empath snaps, it is not a failure, it is a resurrection, a holy defiance, a silent revolution that shakes the very core of the narcissist's kingdom. And though the narcissist may scream, may plead, may project and manipulate and threaten, it no longer matters, because the empath has heard the truth, not from the narcissist, but from within. Let us pause here. I will continue in part 2 with the deeper symbolism of this transformation, the archetypes involved, the shadow integration that must follow, and what becomes of the empath once they cross the threshold of awakening. And so the empath walks away, not in fury, not in vengeance, but in revelation. Their steps may be quiet, yet the psychic rapture left behind echoes like thunder through the soul of the narcissist. You must understand, when a soul has lived too long in the temple of false sacrifice, his exit becomes divine protest. Now, let us delve deeper into what truly happens beneath the surface of this dynamic. The archetypal undercurrents, the mythological resonance, and the subtle transformation that stirs in the unconscious when the empath breaks the unspoken contract. We are no longer speaking merely of two individuals. We are speaking of ancient patterns, of gods and goddesses forgotten, of wounds passed down through generations like sacred curses. The empath carries within them the archetype of the wounded healer, the one who must suffer in order to awaken the power to heal. But herein lies the trap: when the wounded healer does not yet know they are wounded, they attempt to rescue others to avoid facing their own fragmentation. And the narcissist, so skilled at weaving illusion, becomes the perfect canvas onto which the empath paints their unlived life. It is projection, yes, but projection in its most seductive form. The empath projects not their shadow, but their light. They pour their potential, their love, their longing to be whole into the narcissist's broken vessel, hoping that in healing them, they too shall be seen. But the narcissist is not a mirror of healing. They are a black hole of the unintegrated shadow. What the empath does not yet understand is that the narcissist does not want to be healed. They want to be admired. They want obedience, not intimacy. Control, not connection. This dynamic creates a psychic split in the empath. The unconscious begins to murmur warnings through dreams of betrayal, of drowning, of endless corridors with no exit. These are not just dreams, they are symbols. The soul is speaking. The water in these visions often represents emotion unprocessed and overwhelming. The corridors, repetition, the cycle, the soul trapped in a pattern that mimics love but is rooted in trauma. Eventually, the empath begins to experience what I call the shadow revolt. This is not rebellion in the ordinary sense. It is the return of the exiled parts of the self-anger, desire, rage, truth. All the emotions that the empath learned were too much as a child. All the truths they buried to preserve peace. These forces do not return politely. They burst forth like volcanoes, long held dormant. And the empath, who has always identified with being good, kind, gentle, is terrified by their own capacity for fire. But I tell you, this fire is sacred. It is not destruction, it is purification. It is the soul reclaiming its boundaries, its right to exist, its divine fury at having been diminished. And it is in this moment that the empath finally realizes they were never here to be consumed by others' wounds. They were here to witness them, not to die within them. The narcissist, confronted with this fire, recoils. They will often accuse the empath of becoming someone else, of being cold, cruel, distant, But the truth is, the empath is not becoming someone else. They are becoming whole. They are integrating the split between the persona, the mask of kindness, and the shadow, the hidden truth, is dissolving. The empath is no longer playing the role of healer. They are becoming real. This process is not linear. It does not unfold with grace. Often, the empath will feel guilt, shame, even longing for the narcissist after leaving. Why? Because the narcissist did not just mirror pain. They mirrored the wounded child within the empath, the parts of them that felt invisible, unworthy, or unlovable unless they were needed. This inner child must be held, not judged. The empath must turn their compassion inward now to themselves, and this is the hardest part, to love oneself after years of abandonment, to forgive the self for participating in the illusion, to grieve not only the relationship, but the fantasy of who the narcissist could have been. The psychic bond does not break with logic, it breaks with truth. And truth must be felt in the body, not just known by the mind. This is why the empath often experiences fatigue, shaking, even sickness after leaving. The body is releasing what the soul has carried for far too long. In dreams, the symbols begin to shift. The empath may see bridges, thresholds, gates. They may dream of lions, serpents, sacred rivers. These are not random, they are initiations. The soul is guiding them back into the realm of the archetype, not as a prisoner, but as a sovereign. The lion, for example, often represents courage, the emergence of the authentic self. The serpent, transformation, the shedding of old skin. The river, flow, the restoration of inner life after stagnation. When I speak of these things, I do not speak as a mystic who has abandoned science. I speak as one who sees no boundary between psyche and symbol, between neuron and numinous, what you call healing. I call reintegration what you call awakening. I call individuation the sacred journey from fragmentation to wholeness. The empath, once torn between needing love and fearing loss, begins to root themselves in something deeper, the self, not the ego, not the persona, but the silent, eternal center that has always whispered beneath the noise. The self does not beg to be loved. It is love. And from that place, the empath no longer enters relationships to be saved. They enter to share. Now the narcissist, still trapped in their labyrinth of grandiosity, may attempt to return. They may send messages laced with guilt or praise or regret. But make no mistake, this is not awakening. This is withdrawal, the loss of supply. The narcissist does not mourn the empath. They mourn the loss of control, of reflection, of power. And here, the empath must remember to re-enter the cycle is to betray the self. Forgiveness is possible. Compassion is noble. But reunion is not always sacred. Sometimes the holiest act of love is distance. This boundary is not cruelty. It is protection, not of the ego, but of the soul. The empath's light must now be directed inward, illuminating the caverns they once avoided, the wounds from childhood, the inherited beliefs about love and pain, the shadow of the healer, the one who gave to others what they never gave themselves. This is the alchemical phase of solutio, the dissolution of the false self, and it leads to the rebirth of the archetype, not as victim, but as mystic. The empath becomes the one who sees not only others, but themselves. They learn to speak their needs, not with apology, but with authority. They learn to sit in solitude without seeking rescue. They learn to love without losing themselves. And in doing so, they become dangerous. Not because they harm, but because they no longer participate in harm. The narcissist, if they ever do awaken, must begin their own journey. But the empath is no longer the guide. They have stepped out of the role. They are no longer the nurse in someone else's nightmare. They are now the sovereign in their own dream. This is a snap, not a break, but a breakthrough. Not the end, but the beginning of true consciousness. Let us pause once more. In part 3, I shall explore how this transformation echoes through the collective psyche, how it changes not only the individual, but the entire psychic field, and how the empath, once healed, becomes not a rescuer, but a mirror of truth. When the empath transcends the wound, the psychic reverberation does not end at the threshold of their own healing. No, something greater is stirred in the collective unconscious. You must not underestimate the archetypal potency of such a rupture. What occurs within one's soul when they reclaim themselves from the jaws of narcissistic possession echoes outward like ripples across a sacred lake. It is not merely personal healing, it is mythic correction. I have long taught that the unconscious is not merely an individual phenomenon, it is collective. There is woven beneath the fabric of our daily perception a vast field of symbolic memory, of inherited meaning, of ancient patterns that each of us participates in. So when the empath awakens, they do not simply withdraw from an unhealthy relationship. They rise from an ancestral lineage of silenced mystics, unseen givers, and scapegoated visionaries. They rupture a generational contract that said, you must suffer so others can survive. This is not metaphor, this is psychogenealogical reality. The empath often carries the unprocessed wounds of the family system. They become the emotional sponge, the psychic lightning rod, the one who intuits what others refuse to name. As children, they learn to read the room. Before they learn to read a book, they survive by attuning to danger, to silence, to unspoken needs. And when they meet the narcissist later in life, it is not coincidence, it is recurrence. The narcissist embodies the very shadow. The empath grew up with emotional neglect cloaked in authority. Manipulation disguised as love. And yet this meeting, however painful, is not a punishment. It is a summons, for within the torment lies the initiation. The narcissist becomes the unknowing priest of the empath's awakening, delivering them through suffering to the altar of the self. It is only through being consumed that the empath remembers their hunger. It is only through invisibility that they reclaim their face. You ask, What becomes of such an empath after the snap? Do they trust again? Do they love again? Yes, but differently. They no longer seek to merge, they seek to meet. They no longer give to be needed, they give to be known. The frequency of their soul shifts where once they attracted those who required rescue, they now attract those who reflect resonance. Equals mirrors, not voids. This shift cannot be faked. It is not a matter of affirmations or declarations. It is an energetic reality born of deep inner reconstitution. You see, the empath, once fragmented into archetypal polarities, victim, martyr, savior, has retrieved those lost pieces. They have integrated, they have danced with their rage and not been consumed. They have sat with their fear and not fled. They have loved themselves without demand. In the language of alchemy, this is the stage of conjunctio, the sacred marriage. Not with another, but within the masculine and feminine energies, once split and externalized, now harmonize inside the psyche. The need to be completed dissolves, and from this inner union, the empath no longer walks the earth as a seeker, but as a source. But let us return for a moment to the narcissist, what becomes of them in this equation. You must understand, the narcissist is not evil. They are wounded, they are frozen in the trauma of a fractured ego. A child who learned that the only way to survive was to dominate, to control, to any vulnerability. But do not mistake this understanding for an invitation to return. Healing the narcissist is not the empath's task. The empath's task is to withdraw the projection, to reclaim the part of themselves that believed love must hurt to be real. If the narcissist ever embarks on their own healing, it must come through their own confrontation with emptiness. And most never do. Because to awaken from narcissism is to face a death, the death of the false self, the persona constructed to protect the inner void. Few are willing to walk through that fire. And so they seek new mirrors, new empaths, new reflections to keep the illusion alive. This is why it is so vital for the empath, once awakened, to speak, not necessarily to the narcissist, but to the world, to share what they have seen, not as vengeance, but as liberation. There are others still sleeping, still giving, still dying within the wrong story. And the empath, reborn, becomes a torchbearer. They begin to speak in symbols, to paint, to write, to teach. They become healers, not by title, but by presence. Their words carry weight because they have bled. Their eyes see truth because they have cried in darkness. They are no longer obsessed with being liked. They are devoted to being real. I have seen this evolution many times in patience, in dream work, in the myths of old. The empath becomes the mystic. The trauma survivor becomes the seer. The silenced child becomes the oracle. And the world, so long addicted to domination, begins to tremble, not in fear, but in recognition. For the return of the empath's voice is the return of Eros, the sacred thread of relatedness that the narcissistic world forgot. And what does this mean for us all? It means we must re-examine the narratives we were given about love. about giving, about sacrifice. It means we must challenge the culture that rewards exploitation and silences intuition. It means we must teach our children that boundaries are not walls, but bridges to truth. The empath who snaps is not broken. They are reclaimed. They no longer fit the mold. They no longer shrink to be digestible. They become paradox, soft and fierce, kind and firm, open and discerning. And this paradox is precisely what our age requires, for the narcissistic structure of society cannot be dismantled by more obedience. It must be dissolved by authenticity. When the empath snaps, they cease to play the game. And in doing so, they change the rules. And yes, it is lonely at first. To wake up from illusion is to grieve. The empath must mourn the version of themselves that stayed small to feel safe. They must mourn the people who only loved the unawakened version of them. They must mourn the story that said their worth was found in suffering. But after the mourning comes the clarity, the stillness, the sacred pause where the soul breathes again. The colors return, the body softens, and they find that they are not empty. Without the narcissist, they are free. And freedom, my friend, is not the absence of pain, it is the presence of truth. Let us pause again. And now we enter the final chamber of this transformation, the part no one sees, because by the time the empath has walked through the fire, they are no longer explaining themselves. They are no longer asking to be understood. They are no longer waiting for the world to catch up. The empath has become sovereign. Sovereignty is not dominance. It is not power over another. It is a full reclamation of one's psychic center. It is the return to the self, not the small.